right, welcome back. What we're going to do now is a little PHP MySQL project where we're going to build something that's actually useful that you're going to be using again and again. And a lot of you are probably very curious about the process and how this actually works. Now, there are a lot of different ways of doing this same process, building this system, but this is a pretty simple way and it works quite well. So I have here a little list of all the steps we need to take so you can know what it is that we need to do. So first we need to build a login HTML form. Then we need to check if the form has been submitted, validate the form data, add the form data to some PHP variables, then connect to the database, query the database for the username submitted in the form. If there are no entries, if that username doesn't exist, then show an error message. Store basic user data from the database in some variables. Verify the stored hash password with the one that was submitted in the form. And if it's invalid, show an error message. And if it's correct, then start a session and create some session variables. Redirect to a profile page. Provide a link to Logout. And then add a cookie clear to the Logout page. Provide a link to log back in, and then close the MySQL connection. Sounds like a lot, and it is, but we're going to do it. So create a couple pages. First one, login.php, and another one will be profile.php. Now, in login.php, the first thing we need to do is build the login HTML form. And what we're going to do is just grab the bootstrap HTML from one of our previous pages. So I'm just going to open up index.php here, and I'm going to select all of the HTML here. I'm going to copy it all, and I'm going to go back to my login.php and paste it just down here. And of course, I need to remove all the PHP and everything within that the copied information. And I'm just going to change the level 1 heading to login. Go up here and again, change the title to login. And we should be good to go here. So then we need to build that HTML form. So I'm just going to add a paragraph tag here with the class of lead, and I'm just going to say, use this form to log into your account. And what I'm going to do now is build a form. And what we'll do here is I'll challenge you to pause the video and build an HTML form that has an input an input for a username, an input for a password, and a button that submits the form. All of these inputs need to have some names because we're going to be grabbing those names in PHP when we submit the form. And the form also needs to submit to the current page using the post collection, using the post method. Now, I'm going to build this right now, and you're free to follow along and just copy exactly what I'm doing. But if you want a little challenge, go ahead, pause the video, try this out, and then come back, and then we'll just go through and tweak what you have to make sure that we're on the same page. So go ahead and pause the video. All right, now if you're still following along, or if you've unpaused the video and you're here to verify what you did, we're going to do this here. We're going to give this the class of form-inline. That's a bootstrap class, just to make it an inline form, something simple. We're going to action, and we're going to submit this to the current page. So PHP script, and in here I'm going to say echo HTML special chars, and then I'm going to wrap that with, I'm going to wrap server, and then in the square brackets here, PHP_self. And that's just going to submit the form to this current page, and we're just wrapping it in special chars here to remove any special characters to prevent any header injections. And the method needs to be post. All right, now in here, we're just going to do some HTML. I'm going to add a div with the class of form dash group. Again, these are all bootstrap classes. Label, I'm going to say class screen reader only. And now if you challenged yourself to code the form yourself, I wouldn't expect you to have all these identical classes. I really just wanted you to have the inputs and the names, and then we can go ahead and add these classes to make sure they look nice. And then we're going to say for, this is going to be for the input that we're coming up, we're going to code here next. And it's going to have the ID of login username, so we need to make sure the for attribute is associated with that. The label will say username. And now input. We're going to say type text class form-control ID login-username, what we had for the for attribute up here, so they're connected. And now placeholder username and name username. And now I'm just going to copy this form group, paste it one more time, and I'm just going to change a few things around. This is going to be login password. Change the value here to password. The type will be password. The ID will be login password. Placeholder, password, and name, password. All right. So now that we got that, we're going to add a button. Type submit, the class btn default, and name, this is important, login. Login. And now we have our form. Let's check it out. All right, here it is. The login form. Use this form to log into your account. Username, password, login. It currently doesn't do anything. Submits to the current page, but nothing is happening. We need to handle that form data. So what's next on our list? Check if the form has been submitted. Well, we do that by building an if statement that checks if the form has been set. So if is set. Check the post collection, and it's going to look for login. That's the button that we just added a moment ago. And now what we need to do is validate the form data. And we're just going to use that function that we built. We're just going to recode it here. Build a function that to validate data. All right, now that we have that, we're going to create some variables. So now we're going to say form. I'm going to call it form user. Validate form data. This would be the post collection. And we're going to be checking for username. We're going to be storing that in there rather. And then form pass, I'll call it. Validate form data and password. So those were the two things passed in our form that were created in HTML. Now what we need to do is connect to the database. And why is that? Because we need to be able to make an SQL query. So let's include connection.php because we already built that. Now what we need to do is create a query. Create SQL query. And I'm going to store a variable here. And the query that I'm going to do here is select username, email, and password, because those are the three that I want, from the users table where, this is a new one, this is an SQL syntax, where username is equal to, and then in single strings, form user. Now let's just take a moment just to look at this query here. So we're selecting username, email, and password from the users table where username equals form user. This is going to be what is stored in here. So what you typed in the form. So if I typed in Brad Hussey, it's going to query the database for these tables, for these rows where the username is equal to Brad Hussey. And so basically what's going to happen here is we're checking to see if Brad Hussey exists in the database. And so now what we're going to do is store the result, and then we're going to save the result in the variable here, MySQL _query. And the two arguments you pass in is connection that we made in the connection.php file and the query that we just wrote. And so now what's going to happen is we're going to verify if result is returned. That's going to check to see, are there any instances of this username, Brad Hussey, for example? And we're going to say if MySQLi _num _rows, and we're going to test result is greater than 0. So that means if there is a result, at least one, store basic user data in some variables. And then we're going to do a while loop here. This is where we're going to store some of that information that we queried in the table, because now we have access to it. I'm going to say row equals MySQLi _fetch _assoc for associative array. Pass in the result as an argument. And then now we can store some variables. User, I'm going to say row, and then in square brackets, I'm going to reference, because this is the array we're referencing, username, because that's what it's called in our database. We're also going to be grabbing the email and the password. But let's call this hashed pass, because that's important. We need to be able to reference the hashed password there. So we're going to call it that. And in the database, it's just called password. But keep this in mind, because now we need to test the hashed pass, which we'll do in a moment here. So now that we have our user data stored in the variables, we need to verify the hashed password with the typed password. And that's the password that was typed in the form. So we need to use an if statement here. And we're using the password _verify PHP function. And we'll check the form pass, which was created up here with the form data, and then the hashed pass, which is from the database. And so this is going to test the two and check them to see if they match. Now, they're not going to exactly match in terms of characters because this is encrypted, the hashed pass, but this function will test the two together to see if they match, doing some decryption and all this sort of stuff, a bunch of magic that we don't have to worry about because it's built right into the function. And so if it is correct, then we have correct login details. So notice how first what we did was when the user logged in or tried to log in, we only tested for their username. We didn't test for their password. And so it's going to check to see if this user exists in the database using some MySQL queries here. We're going to store the data from that user, so username, email, and password. And then in the password, we're verifying here using the password verify. And this is kind of the last step of them logging in. If it's correct, then great, they're good to go, and we'll go ahead and start the session. If not, then we can send them an error message. So this means it's correct. So we're going to start a session, and that's using the session start function. And then now we can store data in session variables. And so they look like this. We're going to call this logged in user just to use a different naming convention. And then we're going to grab the data in our while loop up here. So user, email, and hashed pass. So user is this. So we're going to pass that data from the database that we grabbed earlier and store it in a session variable so that we can access it anywhere while we have our session active. And I'm going to copy this, paste it, and change logged in user to logged in email. And this will just be the email variable we created up here in our while loop. And then we're going to use the header function in PHP, and that basically allows us to redirect the user somewhere else. So we're going to redirect them to the profile.php page. Now, before we do that, else, this is if their password didn't match using the password verify. We need to do something. All we're going to do is create an error message. And I'm going to say login error. And I'm just going to say, now if you want to make this look nicer, just wrap it in the Bootstrap div with the class of alert and alert danger. So we got a div here with the class of alert and alert danger. And I'm going to close that div. And that's just going to look nice once we spit out that error message later on. Okay, now we need to go down to this other curly brace. So we finished this if statement here, the verify the password. And so now we're going to check to see another else, and that else is connected to the if MySQL num rows is greater than 0. So if the number of rows is greater than 0, meaning if there is a result, we're going to do this. And if there are no results, we're going to go ahead and create another error message and store it in a variable. So we're going to say login error. The same variable is up here because they're not going to appear at the same time, so we can reuse it. And again, you can wrap this information using the same div with the class up here for Bootstrap. So the alert danger div with that class. And we're also going to go ahead and add a data dismiss link. And that's just another Bootstrap thing. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to do an A tag here, class of close and data dash dismiss equals alert, because this is an alert. And then I'm just going to use the times HTML entity. And now say that should be good to go. And we will display this login error while I have you here right above the form. So we'll just say PHP echo login error. Now it won't display if there is no login error, but if there is, it's going to show up right here. Now scroll back up. Last thing we need to do here is after our else, right before the final if statement closing curly brace, because now we're done with MySQL and we don't want to leave it open. MySQLi underscore close, and we're going to reference the connection variable we created in our connection.php. Okay, pretty heavy lifting. We're not done yet though. What do we have left? We need to go to that profile page that we're redirecting to. So go to profile.php And we're going to create a very, very basic profile page, nothing fancy, but let's grab that bootstrap outline, the HTML bootstrap outline. So I'm just going to copy everything from login.php, paste it, obviously remove all that PHP that we just created because we don't need it here. Change the title to profile page. And then we're going to remove all of this, the form data and all that stuff. And we can go ahead and change the class lead here to welcome, and then a PHP script, and we'll say echo, and we can access the session variable logged in user, and then exclamation point after that. Let's add another paragraph tag down here and say PHP echo. We're going to grab that session variable again, but we're going to look for logged in email. Close that PHP script. And then one last thing, paragraph tag with an A link in there, and that's going to link to logout.php. We're going to give it the class of btn, btn danger, and btn sm for small, logout. And that's just going to make it look a little bit nicer. Now, before this actually works, we can't access the session until we start the session on this page. So scroll up to the very top, and in a PHP script, PHP session start. That's going to start the session. Now on our profile page, we will have the data of the user who's logged in. Now, why don't we go ahead and test what we have so far? So here we have our login page. Let's start off by just submitting an empty form. No such user in database. Please try again. Here's our close button. Let's just try a username. Let's just say something like this. Wrong username, password combination, because Brad Hussey was a user in the database, but the password is wrong. So let's just try another user, say Brad Hussey, and just random. There we go. Password, username, password combination is incorrect. So now what we need to do is actually try with a username and password combination that works. So in my database here, remember, we need to test with a user who has a hashed password. These aren't going to work anymore because these are verbatim passwords that aren't hashed using the password hash function. However, this one down here has a password hashed entry. What you need to do, if you haven't, is create an entry with a hashed password. And remember, you can go back to our password hash lecture where we created that entry. So if you haven't done that yet, quickly go back there, do that, and come back here. And so I'm going to try and log in as Johnny Bravo with this password, which is not actually what I'm going to try and log in with. This password actually it means my password. And I know that just because I created the password. So now let's go back to our login page and log in with Johnny Bravo. Password, my password. Log in. Welcome, Johnny Bravo. Your email address is brad@email.com. So it worked. I logged in successfully as Johnny Bravo. And it's giving me my email address just as proof. And now if I click the logout, it's going to take us to logout.php, which, if you remember, looks like this. We have the unset, destroy, and then echo you've been logged out, see you next time. So why don't we try that and see what happens? You've been logged out, see you next time. So now, in theory, if I go to profile.php, everything should be empty. And it's not. Why is that? Well, a lot of the time your browser will store a cookie using the session that we started. And so this just won't cut it. They're important to do, but we need to also check to see if there's a cookie been set. And if so, clear that cookie, empty the cookie, and reset it altogether. And the way that we do that is like so. I'm just going to do it right up here at the very top. So did the user's browser send a cookie for the session? We're going to check with an if statement here, and we'd say is set. That's where we recognize that. And then we're going to use the cookie variable. That's, again, a super global. And inside the square brackets, it's just going to be session underscore name. That's something that we have access to. And then in the if statement, we're going to go ahead and empty the cookie. And the way that you set a cookie is using the set cookie function. And inside the parentheses, there are a few different things. You need to the first argument would be the session, the cookie name. So we're going to call it this session name so that it matches the cookie that's been created, comma, and then empty. We're going to reset that to an empty name. And then the next argument you need to pass in is how long you want this cookie to be active. So we're going to say time PHP function minus 86400. So that is 1 day to have this cookie be active. And then I'm going to put in a string here, /. That just means for the entire site. So this cookie is available across the entire site. And if you're curious about the set cookie syntax, just look up set cookie function in PHP and you'll understand these arguments that I passed in a little bit more. So now if I save and go here and log out and then go back to profile.php, now nothing is there because the cookie has been totally emptied. Last thing I want to do is just add a link that gives the user the ability to log back in. So we're just going to echo a paragraph tag that simply has a link inside of it, and we'll link them to login.php, and this should be in single strings, and we'll just say log back in. And now we should have a login link available here on the logout page. So now it'll just take us back to login.php for us to do the same process again. Johnny Bravo, my password, logging in. Welcome, Johnny Bravo. There's your email, logout, boom. You've been logged out. See you next time. So that is the login profile page logout project. It's very, very useful to know this stuff because it's basically the basis of your applications you're going to want to build that have a simple login and logout process. You need to know that. And so if you save that code, you can use that over and over again for your future projects. And you can build upon it for, with extra things and, extra styles and some extra functionality. And up next, we're actually going to do a really cool PHP application that takes us another 10 steps further. And we're going to build a client address book. So we're going to log in. We're going to be able to add clients, remove clients, and log out. And then if you log back in, you'll be able to see your client list. So we're going to do that next.